It was a late summer afternoon, and the sun cast its golden light across the streets of the small city. In a modest, quiet corner of town stood the gallery known as Benson's Art House, a space where art lovers and collectors usually came to see real art, the kind that had been curated, praised, and deemed worthy by the upper echelons of society. The gallery's crisp white walls were lined with modern works that looked like something you would find in any high-end auction house, each framed in expensive gold leaf. But on this particular afternoon, the gallery owner, an arrogant middle-aged man named Benson, was staring at something he had never seen before, a piece of art that, in his opinion, had no place among his carefully curated collection. Tarek, a young black artist, stood before him, clutching his portfolio tightly. His clothes were modest, a simple gray t-shirt and faded jeans, and his dark eyes gleamed with a mixture of nervousness and quiet determination. The heavy scent of old wood and paint in the gallery seemed to suffocate him as he waited for Benson's verdict. "So, you're telling me this is your work?" Benson asked, his tone condescending. He took the portfolio from Tarek's hands, flipping it open with an exaggerated air of boredom. His eyes quickly scanned the first piece, a bold, abstract canvas filled with vibrant reds, yellows, and swirling strokes that almost seemed to move. It was chaotic but compelling, with an energy that spoke of struggle and emotion. Benson raised an eyebrow, looking at Tarek as though he had just handed him a joke. This isn't art. It's just a mess of colors. What are you trying to say with this?" Tarek's heart sank, but he steadied himself. He had anticipated this rejection, but the sting of it was still sharp. He'd been through this too many times before. People like Benson, who had the power to decide what was worthy of attention, had no place for the unpolished, raw talent of someone like him. He had always been told his work was too bold, too unconventional, too full of emotion. I'm trying to capture something real," Tarek said quietly, his voice faltering slightly. "The struggles we face, the emotions that get lost in the chaos of life. It's about what we don't see, the things that are hidden beneath the surface." Benson snorted dismissively. "I don't see anything worth hanging on these walls. You're lucky I'm even considering you." He shut the portfolio with a snap, almost as if he couldn't wait to be rid of it. "But I can't put this kind of nonsense on display. Art is about skill, refinement, and something that speaks to the audience in a way they understand. You don't have that, and frankly, I don't see you ever getting there." The words stung, and Tarek struggled to hide the hurt on his face. He had spent months perfecting this piece, channeling his own life experiences, his pain, his joy, and the struggles of his community into something that felt deeply personal and yet universally understood. But to Benson, it was just a mess of colors. "I understand," Tarek said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Thank you for your time." Benson barely looked up from the portfolio, already preoccupied with his next task. "Yeah, sure. Don't waste my time again unless you've got something more sophisticated next time." Tarek turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. He could hear Benson's voice fading into the background as he exited the gallery and stepped into the bustling street outside. The world felt cold, even in the warmth of the setting sun. His mind was racing, but there was one thought that continued to loop over and over: why am I not good enough? He walked slowly, his feet dragging along the cracked sidewalk, as he pondered the rejection he had just experienced. It wasn't the first time. In fact, it felt like a cruel, familiar routine that he had been caught in since he started showing his work to others. Over the years, he had shown his art to countless gallery owners, dealers, and even strangers in cafes. The response was always the same. Either they didn't understand his work, or they dismissed it as too radical or unpolished. But for some reason, this time felt different. Perhaps it was because he had put so much of himself into this collection, his emotions, his dreams, his anger, and his resilience. He had painted not for recognition, but for the need to express something deep within him. The rejection by someone like Benson felt like an attack on the core of his identity. With no particular destination in mind, Tarek wandered aimlessly, eventually finding himself in a small park by the river. It was a place he often came to think, to gather his thoughts, or just to escape the noise of the world. As he sat on the weathered bench, his gaze wandered to the water, and he thought about the path he had chosen. Art had always been his passion, even as a child. He had drawn pictures on the walls of his home, scribbling with crayons, before he could even form words. His mother had always encouraged him, saying, "Your art is special, Tarek. Don't let anyone tell you it isn't." But as he grew older, he began to see how the world worked. The art world wasn't about passion. It was about who you knew, what you could afford, and whether or not your work fit into the narrow boxes that the elite art world had defined. Tarek had never been a part of that world. He came from a working-class neighborhood, his mother a single parent who worked long hours to keep them afloat. Money was tight, and opportunities were few. Yet, he had never stopped creating. His mind wandered back to Benson's words. "You're lucky I'm even considering you." He could feel the weight of those words pressing down on him, like a stone lodged in his chest. He knew he would never be able to change Benson's mind. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe it wasn't about winning over people like Benson. Maybe it was about finding his own path, one where his work could speak for itself, without needing the approval of those who didn't understand it. Tarek stood up from the bench, wiping the dirt from his pants. He felt a surge of determination flood through him, something new and unfamiliar. "I don't need him," he thought. "I don't need anyone who doesn't see my worth." With renewed purpose, Tarek turned and walked back toward his small studio apartment. He had work to do. And this time, he would not let anyone tell him what his art was worth. Tarek spent the next few weeks in solitude, consumed by the sting of rejection but also driven by a newfound resolve. The harsh words of Benson echoed in his mind, but this time they did not carry the same weight of doubt they once had. Instead, they had become fuel, igniting a fire in him that refused to be extinguished. He locked himself in his cramped studio apartment, the small room cluttered with paintbrushes, easels, and half-finished canvases. The space smelled of oil paint, the sharp scent of turpentine, and the earthy aroma of freshly ground charcoal. The walls, covered with layers of vibrant strokes and deep shadows, told the story of his evolution as an artist, a story of constant rejection and quiet defiance. Tarek had been working with colors for years, blending and shaping them into forms that reflected his inner world. But now, after his latest encounter with Benson, he wanted to push further. He wasn't simply going to paint what he saw in the world around him. He wanted to paint what he felt, the anger, the injustice, the beauty, and the depth of the experiences that had shaped him as a person. For the first time in his career, he started to experiment with unconventional materials. He incorporated torn pieces of newspaper into his canvas, symbolizing the disconnection between society's expectations and his own experiences. He mixed in vibrant hues of gold and black, intertwining the symbolism of wealth, power, and struggle. It wasn't just the art that was evolving, so was he. His subjects shifted, too. In the past, he had painted the faces of his family and community, capturing moments of joy or sorrow. But now, he wanted to explore something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. His new work began to touch on the themes of identity and culture, of belonging and alienation in a world that often didn't seem to care. Late one evening, Tarek sat at his canvas, his brush moving in rhythmic strokes, almost as if the art itself was flowing through him. He didn't stop to analyze what he was doing. There was no longer a conscious effort to adhere to any established rules. He was lost in the process, in the act of creation. Every stroke felt like a revelation, a new discovery that he had not anticipated. The art was changing. The chaos that had once characterized his work was now infused with meaning, layers of symbols, hidden messages, and the subtle interplay of light and shadow. There were whispers of stories told in the faintest details, in the textures that emerged from the canvas. To anyone who looked at it, it might still appear abstract or messy, but to Tarek, each piece was a manifestation of his own journey, a journey of rising above the noise of the world and finding his own voice. Days turned into weeks, and Tarek's latest collection began to take shape. He spent every waking moment refining it, tweaking the colors, the textures, the forms. It felt like he was building something monumental, something that could not be ignored. But he knew that the world was still not ready to see what he was creating. Not yet. One day, as Tarek stepped outside for a break, he ran into an old friend named Kayla. Kayla had always been one of the few people who truly understood his art. She was an art critic who had taken an interest in Tarek's work years ago when she saw the raw talent in his early pieces. She had always encouraged him, even when the world outside seemed to dismiss him. "Tarek!" Kayla called out, waving as she spotted him walking down the street. Her smile was warm, and her eyes sparkled with recognition. "How's the work coming along?" Tarek stopped, hesitant at first, but then allowed himself to smile back. "It's coming, slowly." Kayla walked up to him, her gaze flicking over his worn-out clothes. She was dressed in sleek professional attire, the result of her rising success in the art world. "I saw your last exhibition," she said. "You've improved. Your work is more intense now. But it feels like you're still holding something back, don't you think?" Tarek chuckled softly. "Maybe. I've been trying to figure out what I need to say. What I need to express." Kayla studied him carefully. "I think I know what you're trying to say. You've always been holding back the real you. There's a fire inside you, Tarek. It's time to let it burn." Her words resonated with him, sinking in deeper than he had expected. Maybe she was right. He had spent so much time trying to fit into a mold, trying to prove to others that he could paint within the lines of what they considered acceptable. But he realized now that it wasn't about fitting in. It was about standing out, about pushing the boundaries and showing the world something it hadn't seen before. "I think I know what I need to do," Tarek replied, his voice firmer now, more confident. "I need to break free. I need to show the truth." Kayla's eyes lit up with excitement. "That's the spirit. You've got something that no one else has. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The conversation stayed with Tarek as he walked home that day, his thoughts swirling like the colors on his canvases. Kayla had reminded him of something he had lost sight of, the importance of authenticity. She had reminded him that true art came from within, and it wasn't about following the crowd. It was about pushing boundaries, challenging perceptions, and leaving behind something that could not be ignored. That night, Tarek set to work with renewed vigor. He tore through the rest of his unfinished pieces, cutting through the layers of caution that had been holding him back. He mixed colors in a frenzy, his hands steady but quick. His strokes became more confident, bolder than ever before. There was no second-guessing this time. He knew exactly what he was doing, even if the world wouldn't understand it immediately. The new collection that emerged from those nights of intense work was unlike anything he had ever created before. There were large canvases that filled the room with their bold shapes and vivid colors. But more importantly, there was a new sense of purpose to the work. Each piece was a statement, an expression of his soul that could not be ignored. Tarek stepped back and surveyed his work, feeling a strange calm settle over him. For the first time in his career, he felt like he was doing something truly meaningful. This wasn't just art, this was a message, a story that demanded to be told. And whether the world was ready for it or not, Tarek was prepared to show them exactly what he had created. Tarek had poured every ounce of his energy into his latest collection. Every brushstroke felt like a piece of his soul, and every canvas was an extension of his very being. He knew these works would be different. They weren't just paintings anymore, they were stories, emotions, and memories brought to life in vivid, unapologetic color. He had spent the past few weeks revisiting his old idea, that he needed to show the truth, the rawness of his experience. There was a vulnerability in his art now, a fierce honesty that dared anyone to look at it and not be moved. He had embraced his cultural heritage, his struggles, and his identity in a way he hadn't before. The works were powerful, unapologetically confronting the viewer with stark images of pain, hope, and perseverance. Still, Tarek knew that in the art world, where the canvas was often as much a commodity as it was a medium for expression, he needed to be strategic. The rejection from Benson still stung, but it hadn't shattered his resolve. He had learned that he could no longer afford to work in the shadows, hoping that his art would be noticed. He had to make himself known, and that meant taking risks. The day came when Tarek decided to make another attempt. This time, however, he wasn't just bringing a portfolio with a few pieces, he was carrying an entire exhibition. He carefully packed his canvases, each one wrapped in thick cloth to protect them, and made his way to the gallery. As he walked down the familiar, cracked streets toward Benson's art house, a quiet sense of anticipation settled over him. This time would be different. He could feel it in his bones. Arriving at the gallery, Tarek took a deep breath before stepping inside. Benson, who was behind the counter, looked up at him with mild surprise. His face showed no sign of recognition. The last time they had met, Tarek had left in defeat, but now there was something in his step, a quiet confidence that had come from knowing that his art was stronger than ever before. "I've got something to show you," Tarek said, his voice steady, despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "This time, it's different." Benson raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Really?" He barely looked up from the paperwork he was going through. "I told you before, kid, I'm not in the market for any more of your avant-garde nonsense." Tarek swallowed his frustration, but he pushed forward. "I promise you, this is something you've never seen before. These pieces are different. You'll see the potential." Benson finally put his papers down and leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he scanned Tarek with the same dismissive look he had given him the last time. "All right, let's see it," he said, though there was no genuine interest in his voice. Tarek unwrapped the first canvas, a bold piece that depicted a figure standing alone in the middle of a vast, barren landscape. The figure was abstract, but the colors used for the backdrop, blues, grays, and blacks, gave it a cold, distant feeling. Yet the figure itself was defined in stark contrast, vibrant and radiant. It symbolized hope in the face of oppression, standing strong, despite the desolation around it. Benson took one look and then shook his head. "What is this supposed to be? Some kind of sad self-portrait?" He scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "You really think anyone is going to pay good money for this? Art like this doesn't sell. It's not even finished. It's messy, unclear. Who's going to want to put something like this in their house?" Tarek's stomach tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. It's a reflection of the journey people face in life, of being trapped, yet holding on to something deep inside. It's about persistence, about survival. Benson didn't listen. He waved his hand dismissively. "It's not art, Tarek. It's a jumble of colors. People don't want to see their own struggles reflected in art. They want something beautiful. Something they can show off at dinner parties." Tarek moved to the next canvas, unwrapping it slowly. It was a more intimate piece, two intertwined figures, one dark and one light, set against a backdrop of swirling colors. The figures seemed to be struggling with each other, yet their connection was undeniable. It was a piece about unity despite difference, about the tensions in relationships and society, and the rawness of human connection. Once again, Benson barely glanced at it. "This is just more of the same," he muttered, dismissing the piece with a shrug. "I don't see anything special here, Tarek. It's too complicated. No one wants to think too much when they look at art. They want to feel something, not get a headache trying to decipher it." The words stung, but Tarek didn't back down. He was determined to show him. "You're not seeing it," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You're not seeing the story it tells." Benson rolled his eyes. "I don't have time for this, kid. I've seen hundreds of artists just like you, all thinking they've got the next big thing. But they don't. They're not ready for the market. And frankly, neither are you." Tarek took a step back, trying to steady himself. It wasn't the first time he had heard this type of rejection, but it still hurt. He had worked so hard to bring something new into the world, to push past the limitations placed on him by others. Yet, time and time again, he was met with closed doors and cold indifference. "Are you saying you're not interested in showing my work?" Tarek asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the words themselves might reveal his vulnerability. Benson gave a half-hearted shrug. "Not unless you bring something better. This just isn't it." The finality of the rejection hit Tarek like a cold wave. It felt like everything he had worked for, everything he had poured into his art, was being crushed beneath the weight of one man's narrow perception. His stomach churned, and his hands trembled slightly, but he didn't let it show. He gathered the canvases back together and wrapped them in silence. He turned toward the door, knowing that the artist's journey was rarely linear. Rejection was part of it. It always had been. But even as he walked out of the gallery, his mind wasn't consumed with defeat. Instead, it was filled with something deeper, resolve. It was as if the rejection had only made him more determined. If Benson couldn't see the value in his work, then he would find someone who could. He wouldn't stop. He couldn't stop. The world hadn't recognized him yet. But it would. And one day, Benson would regret turning away the artist who had, quite possibly, been the next big thing. After the rejection, Tarek felt a mixture of frustration and disbelief. He had worked tirelessly to create something powerful, something that he knew could not be ignored. Yet, here he was again, on the outside looking in, with no one willing to give him a chance. As he walked away from Benson's gallery, the weight of the rejection was heavy on his shoulders, but there was also something else in his heart, a fire that refused to be extinguished. Tarek's usual solace came from his art. It was where he found both expression and escape. But this time, even the familiar rhythm of his brushstrokes couldn't quiet the noise of his thoughts. His apartment, once a sanctuary, felt more like a cage. His canvases stood in the corners, unfinished, waiting for him to bring them to life. But how could he keep going when no one saw the value in what he was creating? As the days wore on, Tarek wandered the streets of the city, unsure of what his next move would be. His usual spots, the cafe where he sat for hours sketching, the small park by the river where he could clear his head, seemed to lose their appeal. The rejection still clung to him like a shadow, and for the first time in years, he began to question whether he was truly cut out for this path. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, casting the city in a soft golden light, Tarek found himself walking aimlessly through an unfamiliar part of town. It was a quieter, more secluded area, filled with narrow alleyways and old brick buildings. There was an old bookstore at the end of the street that caught his eye, the faint smell of old paper and leather drifting from the cracked door. Curious, he stepped inside. The bookstore was dimly lit, with shelves crammed full of books that seemed to have seen better days. It was the kind of place that felt timeless, as though it had been there for decades, untouched by the outside world. Tarek wandered the aisles, running his fingers along the spines of the books. There was something oddly comforting about the atmosphere here, like stepping into another world where time stood still. As he moved further into the store, he noticed a figure standing near the back, hunched over a desk filled with books and papers. It was an elderly man with a long white beard, his glasses perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. He was scribbling something in a notebook, clearly lost in his thoughts. Tarek hesitated, but then something about the man's presence drew him in. He cleared his throat softly, causing the elderly man to look up from his work. His eyes were sharp, despite his age, and his gaze immediately assessed Tarek, as if sizing him up. "Can I help you, young man?" the man asked in a gravelly voice. Tarek nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was hoping to find here. "I was just looking around. I've never been in this part of town before." The man's eyes twinkled. "Not many people come to this side of the city. It's quiet, too quiet for most. But for those who know where to look, there's always something worth discovering." His voice had a certain weight to it, as though he had seen much in his lifetime. "I'm not sure if I'm looking for anything, really," Tarek replied, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. He knew deep down that he was searching for something, something that could spark a change, something that could reignite his passion for art. The elderly man tilted his head slightly. Art is like life, you know. It's full of struggle, but it's the struggle that makes it worthwhile. You can't create beauty without first understanding pain. You seem like you've been through some of that pain yourself. Tarek was taken aback by the man's words. He wasn't used to strangers speaking so candidly about his inner turmoil, especially not someone who hadn't seen his work. But there was something in the man's expression that felt strangely comforting. He wasn't judging Tarek. He was simply seeing him. I've had some challenges, Tarek said slowly, unsure of why he felt compelled to share this with the old man. But it's the art that keeps me going. The problem is, no one seems to see the value in what I'm doing. The old man raised an eyebrow, setting down his pen. It's not that they don't see it. It's that they don't understand it. Art is a language, young man, and it takes time to learn how to speak it fluently. People will tell you that your work is too raw, too unrefined. But they're just afraid of the truth you're showing them. Tarek stood there, uncertain of how to respond. The man's words felt like they were speaking directly to his soul. You think so? He asked, his voice quieter now, as though he were afraid the answer might be too much to bear. The elderly man smiled, a knowing, almost mischievous grin. I don't think so. I know so. The best artists are the ones who speak the hardest truths. It's never easy, and it rarely happens overnight, but if you're willing to keep at it, you'll find your audience. You just have to trust the process, and trust yourself. Tarek's heart beat a little faster at the man's words. Could it really be that simple? Could all he needed was patience and belief in his work? The doubts that had weighed on him for weeks seemed to lift, just slightly, as if a window had cracked open in his mind. I've been trying, Tarek admitted, but it feels like I'm hitting a wall. I've shown my work to so many people, and they all say the same thing, it's not ready, or it's too much. Maybe they're right. The old man shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving Tarek's face. No, they're wrong. It's never too much. You just need to find the right person. The world doesn't always recognize brilliance immediately. But when it does, you'll know it. Keep going, young man. Don't let them silence you. Tarek felt something shift inside him. There was a kind of clarity in the old man's words, a reassurance that he hadn't realized he was missing. He wasn't alone in this struggle. Even the greatest artists had been told their work was too much or too different before they were finally understood. Thank you, Tarek said, his voice filled with newfound determination. I think I needed to hear that. The elderly man nodded, his smile widening. I'm glad to help. But remember this, young man, the world may not be ready for what you're creating, but that doesn't mean it's not worth creating. Keep speaking your truth. Tarek left the bookstore that evening feeling lighter, as though a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. The journey was far from over, but now, he had a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that one day, the world would see the value in his art, not because it was what people expected, but because it was true, it was his, and no one could take that away from him. The weeks after his conversation with the elderly man at the bookstore passed in a blur. Tarek's heart no longer felt burdened by doubt, instead, it pulsed with a new sense of clarity. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready to face it. He spent his days painting with renewed vigor, pouring everything into his work without holding back, without fear of rejection. He had learned something invaluable from that encounter, something that resonated deeply within him. Art was a language, a way of communicating truths that could not always be put into words. It was not about pleasing others or fitting into their expectations, it was about staying true to his own vision, no matter how raw, unpolished, or difficult it was to understand. He would no longer seek approval from those who didn't understand what he was trying to convey. But despite the fire inside him, Tarek still had to face the reality of his situation. He had no gallery representation, no dealer, and no audience. He knew that talent alone wouldn't get him anywhere, he needed a way to get his art seen. The old man's words still echoed in his mind, "Keep going. Don't let them silence you." But where would that journey lead him? Where could he find the right person to see what he saw in his own work? One afternoon, as Tarek was packing up his latest pieces, one of which was a dark, emotionally charged portrait of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the storm, he received a call that would change the trajectory of his career forever. The phone buzzed in his pocket as he cleaned his brushes. When he saw the unfamiliar number on the screen, he hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Is this Tariq Ahmed?" a woman's voice asked, with a tone that was both professional and warm. "Yes, this is he," Tariq replied, curious and cautious. "Who's calling?" "This is Clara Davis, curator of the Aurora Gallery downtown," she said, introducing herself. Tariq's heart skipped a beat. The Aurora Gallery was one of the most respected galleries in the city, known for its bold and diverse exhibitions. To have his name even mentioned by someone from there felt surreal. "I came across your portfolio, and I wanted to talk to you about your work. It's quite striking, to say the least." Tariq's pulse quickened. "Wait, you've seen my work?" "I have. Actually, I saw some of your pieces at a local exhibition," Clara continued. "The ones that were rejected by Benson's gallery. I don't believe he truly appreciated what you were creating. But I see something different. You've got real potential, Tariq. I'm very interested in displaying your work at the Aurora Gallery." Tariq almost dropped the phone. His mind raced. The Aurora Gallery? He couldn't believe it. After all the rejection, all the doubts, someone from one of the most prestigious galleries in the city was reaching out to him. His heart swelled with disbelief and excitement. "You're serious?" he asked, almost breathless. "You want to showcase my work?" "Absolutely," Clara replied. "I think your art speaks to a larger narrative that is missing from contemporary galleries right now. It's raw, it's personal, and it's real. And the world needs to see it." The words were like a balm to Tariq's soul, healing wounds he didn't even know were there. He had always known his art had value, but hearing someone with the authority and expertise to recognize it made all the difference. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was the breakthrough he needed. "When can we meet?" Tariq asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "How about tomorrow afternoon? I'd like to discuss the specifics of the exhibition and see some of your latest pieces in person," Clara suggested. "I'll be there," Tariq said, almost too eager. "Thank you, Clara. This means everything to me." After the call ended, Tariq stood in his small studio for a long time, staring at his unfinished canvases. It felt as though everything had led to this moment. The rejection, the self-doubt, the countless hours spent perfecting his craft, it had all been building toward this breakthrough. The old man's words played in his mind again, "You just need to find the right person." And now, he had. The next day, Tariq made his way to the Aurora Gallery with his heart pounding in his chest. The gallery's modern, sleek exterior was a far cry from the smaller, more intimate venues he was used to, but as he entered, he was struck by the sense of possibility that filled the air. Clara met him at the door with a warm smile, and her eyes immediately went to the portfolio he was carrying. "I've been looking forward to seeing your work in person," she said, guiding him to a small side room where the light was perfect for viewing art. The space was quiet, the atmosphere calm and inviting. Tariq unwrapped the canvases slowly, feeling a mixture of pride and nervousness. Clara's expression shifted as she examined the pieces. One by one, she took in each canvas, her gaze lingering on the details, the emotion captured in each stroke. Tariq could barely breathe as he waited for her to speak. This is exactly what I was hoping for," Clara said, her voice filled with admiration. "The layers of emotion, the power in each piece, it's palpable. This is the kind of art we want to showcase. You've captured something that's missing from a lot of contemporary work. It's raw, it's emotional, and it has a story behind it." Tariq's chest swelled with pride. For the first time, his art wasn't just being acknowledged, it was being celebrated for what it truly was. Not for its marketability, not for its ability to fit in with trends, but for its authenticity. We want to feature you in our next exhibition, Clara continued. I think this will be the beginning of something incredible for you, Tarek. Tarek felt a tear slip down his cheek. He didn't even bother wiping it away. This was the moment he had been dreaming of for years. All the pain, the rejection, the struggle had led him here. He had stayed true to himself, and now, the world was finally starting to see him. Starting to see his art. I don't know what to say, Tarek said, his voice shaky with emotion. You don't need to say anything, Clara replied with a gentle smile. Just keep creating. The world will come to you. As Tarek left the gallery that afternoon, he felt lighter than he had in a long time. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but for the first time, he was no longer walking it alone. He had found someone who believed in his vision, someone who saw the power of his art. And in that moment, he knew with certainty, his journey was just beginning. Tarek hardly slept the night before the exhibition. His mind raced with anticipation, excitement, and a hint of fear. The Aurora Gallery exhibition was more than just an opportunity for recognition, it was a defining moment in his life, the culmination of years of struggle and persistence. This was his chance to prove that the doubts and rejections didn't define him, his art did. The day of the exhibition, the gallery was alive with energy. People flowed through the space, admiring the works of several artists, but Tarek could feel the weight of their gaze when they stopped in front of his paintings. They didn't just look at them, they studied them, felt them. His work was no longer something hidden in the corners of galleries or dismissed by critics who couldn't see beyond their own narrow views. It was on the walls of one of the most prestigious galleries in the city, and it was being appreciated for the depth of emotion it conveyed. Clara had warned him that the crowd could be unpredictable, that some would love his work and others would misunderstand it. But Tarek was no longer afraid of judgment. He had learned to embrace the vulnerability his art required. Every brushstroke was an expression of his truth, and he refused to let anyone dim that light. As the evening wore on, Tarek noticed a few familiar faces among the crowd, artists he had admired from afar but never dared to approach. One, in particular, was an older man named Alistair Grant, a renowned contemporary artist whose works graced the walls of galleries across the world. Alistair's reputation for pushing boundaries with his art was well known, and Tarek had long hoped for the chance to meet him. To Tarek's surprise, Alistair made his way toward him. The older man stopped in front of one of Tarek's paintings, a deep, somber piece that depicted a lone figure standing under a stormy sky, with dark clouds swirling above and a single beam of light cutting through the darkness. I've been watching your work, young man, Alistair said, his voice gravelly but warm. You have a gift for capturing raw emotion. It's a rarity in today's art world. Tarek felt a rush of pride at Alistair's words. The praise of a legend like him was worth more than any gallery opening or exhibition could ever be. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. You've got something special here, Alistair continued, his gaze still locked on the painting. I can see the truth in your brushstrokes, the vulnerability. A lot of people are too afraid to put that kind of honesty into their art, but you've embraced it. Tarek was speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by the validation that now seemed to be pouring in from every direction. Alistair Grant, one of the very artists he had admired, was not only recognizing his work, but also encouraging him to keep going, to push even further. I appreciate that, Tarek finally managed, his voice steadier now. I've spent years trying to find my voice. I think I'm starting to understand what it is. You're on the right track, Alistair said with a smile. But don't get too comfortable. Keep pushing. The best work is always ahead of you. Tarek nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. Alistair's words would stay with him, as would the compliments from others who had come to view his pieces. But it wasn't just the praise that mattered, it was the realization that his work was being seen, that it was making an impact. That, perhaps, was the true measure of success. As the evening came to a close, Clara found Tarek standing alone in front of one of his paintings, his mind racing with the events of the night. She walked up to him, a proud smile on her face. "You did it," she said softly. "The crowd loved your work. The reviews are already pouring in. People are talking about you, Tarek." Tarek didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had dreamed of moments like this for so long, but now that they were here, they felt almost unreal. "I can't believe it. It feels like everything changed in one night." "It's not just tonight," Clara corrected gently. "This is the beginning of a new chapter for you. The work you've put in over the years, the struggles you've overcome, this is the reward for all of it. But don't stop now. You've just gotten started." The words were a reminder that this moment, though monumental, was only the beginning of a much bigger journey. Tarek's mind raced with possibilities. He had already proven to himself that his art had value, that it was worth fighting for. Now, the real work was just beginning. He had to continue growing, creating, and pushing the boundaries of his own art. As he packed up his things that night, Tarek felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, but for the first time in his life, he was ready. He had learned that persistence, belief in oneself, and a willingness to speak his truth through his art were the keys to success. The world might not always understand his work, but that was no longer his concern. He had found his voice, and now, he would let it be heard. Weeks passed since the opening of Tarek's first major exhibition at the Aurora Gallery, and his life had transformed in ways he hadn't anticipated. His work had begun to circulate beyond the local art scene, garnering attention from critics, collectors, and other galleries. Articles were written about his style, which some referred to as brutally honest and emotionally raw. His art was no longer a secret tucked away in the corners of a few select spaces. It had found its place in the broader art world, and people were starting to take notice. But even as his success grew, Tarek remained grounded in the values that had first led him to pick up a paintbrush: authenticity, vulnerability, and truth. He knew that the road ahead was filled with both promise and challenges, but he was no longer the uncertain artist struggling to find his place. He had earned his spot, and he was determined to carve out a future for himself, one that would remain true to the essence of what he had always believed his art could be. One chilly afternoon, as he sat in his studio, putting the final touches on his latest piece, a sprawling landscape painting that mirrored the emotional conflict of a man standing at the crossroads of his life, his phone buzzed again. Tarek glanced at the screen and saw the name of Clara Davis flash across it. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't heard from her in a couple of weeks, and he knew she had been busy with her other artists. "Hello," he answered, trying to keep his tone casual, despite the excitement he felt. "Tarek, how are you?" Clara's voice came through, as warm as ever. "I've been following your work since the exhibition, and I have to say, it's incredible to see how much you've grown in such a short time. You've really made a name for yourself." "Thank you, Clara." "I'm still wrapping my head around it all," Tarek said, feeling a surge of gratitude. "It's been overwhelming, but in the best way." "I'm glad to hear that," Clara replied. "Actually, there's something I wanted to talk to you about. We've had some new collectors express interest in your work, and one of them, someone very influential, wants to meet with you. They're interested in acquiring a few of your pieces for their private collection." Tarek was stunned. The thought of having his work displayed in a private collection, particularly one owned by someone influential, was a milestone he hadn't dared to dream of just months ago. He had worked hard to get to this point, but the magnitude of the opportunity still felt surreal. "That's incredible," Tarek said, struggling to contain his excitement. "Who is it?" "It's Dominic Calloway," Clara said. Tarek's heart skipped a beat. Dominic Calloway was a billionaire tech mogul, known for his vast art collection that spanned centuries of work. He was also known for supporting emerging artists and giving them the platform they needed to truly shine. It was an opportunity that most artists could only dream of. "I can't believe it," Tarek said, his voice shaking slightly with disbelief. "Are you sure he's interested in my work?" "I am," Clara reassured him. "He's been keeping an eye on your pieces for a while now. He's intrigued by the emotional depth and the raw power of your art. He sees something in you that a lot of others miss. This is a huge step, Tarek. Tarek took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The dream of making it as an artist, of having his work appreciated and recognized by people who truly understood its value, was now within his reach. But with it came a new set of challenges and expectations. Was he ready for this next step? Could he maintain his integrity as an artist while navigating the world of high-profile collectors and the business of art? When is the meeting? Tarek asked, his mind racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. We've scheduled it for next week, Clara said. I'll give you all the details, but just know that this could open up a lot of doors for you, Tarek. You've earned it. I'll be there, Tarek replied, his voice firm with newfound determination. Thank you, Clara. For everything. As he ended the call, Tarek stood in the middle of his studio, feeling a wave of emotions wash over him. He had dreamed of moments like this, but now that it was happening, he couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. The success he had achieved so far was incredible, but it wasn't just about recognition, it was about the journey he had taken to get here. The doubts, the struggles, the painful rejections, they had all led him to this point. But with this new opportunity came the awareness that the art world was not just about talent and passion, it was also about business, reputation, and the ability to navigate the complex dynamics of collectors, galleries, and curators. Tarek had never considered himself a businessman. His world had always been about creation, not negotiation or contracts. Yet now, he had to learn to balance both sides, the artist and the entrepreneur. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Tarek had to select which pieces he would bring to the meeting with Dominic Calloway, and he spent countless hours in his studio, curating his best work. His paintings were a reflection of his soul, each piece a snapshot of his journey. He chose works that represented the rawness of his emotions, the vulnerability he had fought so hard to express, and the depth of the stories he wanted to tell. When the day of the meeting arrived, Tarek dressed carefully, but he didn't want to overthink it. He wasn't going to pretend to be someone he wasn't. He was simply going to show up as himself, the artist, the creator, the person who had fought for his place in the world. The meeting took place in a sleek, modern office, one of the many buildings in the heart of the city's financial district. Tarek arrived early, his palms sweaty as he looked over his work one last time before the meeting began. Clara greeted him warmly when he arrived and led him to a private room, where Dominic Calloway was waiting. Dominic was a tall, imposing figure with a sharp sense of style, but there was something undeniably kind about his demeanor. He didn't strike Tarek as the typical billionaire mogul. Instead, he had an aura of quiet confidence and genuine interest in the artists he supported. After brief introductions, Dominic gestured to the pieces displayed before him. Your work, he said with a thoughtful expression, has a level of intensity one haven't seen in years. I think it speaks to something larger than just paint on canvas. It's about the human experience, the struggles, the triumphs. I'm very impressed. Tarek could hardly believe his ears. Here was a man who had seen some of the most valuable works of art in the world, and yet he was standing before him, praising his creations. Thank you, Tarek said, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. I've always tried to show the truth in my work, what it means to struggle, to grow, and to push through. I can see that, Dominic replied. That's why I want to acquire several of your pieces for my collection. Not just as investments, but because I believe in what you're doing. This is just the beginning, Tarek. You're going to change the way people think about art. The words hit Tarek like a wave, and for a moment, he was speechless. This wasn't just about recognition anymore, it was about being part of something bigger, something that could influence the future of art itself. After the meeting, Tarek walked out of the building with Clara, his mind swirling. He had done it. He had made it. But now, the real work began. He had to stay true to his craft, continue to evolve, and never forget the passion that had driven him to this point. The road ahead was full of new opportunities, new challenges, and new lessons. But Tarek was ready. He had fought to be seen. Now, the world would never look away.